The webinar today is a Wellness Series 1. So it's the first of 3 series. And the topic, as I mentioned, is breaking the stigma of mental health. And some of the speakers, as you just saw, is myself. For those of you that don't know me, I am the founder and CEO of Men Impact Change. And with me is our keynote speaker, Mr. Rashad Botai Mills. He's a licensed therapist, a radio host, and a 2019 M.I.C. education honoree. We are going to share more about his accolades and the things he's achieved a little bit later. We also have Esther Pauline. She's not new face. She's one of our advisory committee members. She's been part of Men Impact Change as well for a couple of years now. On top of that, she's also an event coordinator. We also have Kevin Wayne Johnson. He's an executive coach, a John Maxwell certified leader. He's also a Men Impact Change leadership honoree and also an advisory committee.
I'm a firm believer that we need to open up the aperture and have a conversation. Too many of us internalize how we're feeling, what we're going through, because men tend to think that we can handle it and we don't need to bring other people into our personal issues. But this is a community issue, it's a global issue, and the more resources that we can provide to men will give them the confidence and give them the motivation to open up and have the conversation. I'm a firm believer in education and knowledge, and then heightening the level of awareness in terms of what's going on in our community. That helps to break the stigma. And then once the stigma is broken, now we can have the discussion and we can have the dialogue, because we've created an environment that's a little bit more comfortable for men to open up and share. So that's my interest, and that's why I'm here. Thank you for your leadership, Sonny.
The reason why I am interested in this is because I am a mother of 2 young men, and actually one of them has suffered mental illness. And at the time when it first happened, I did not know what to do. I did not know even how to speak about it. But then when I've navigated and continue to navigate even up to now in seeking resources, seeking therapy, and just getting knowledge and awareness of what to look for, what are the signs that I need to be looking for, especially with my younger one, because it's my older one that actually has been struggling with mental illness. So when I look at my other son, is the things that I need to be looking for, the things that I need to be aware of, because at the time my oldest had come home for Christmas, and we thought that everything was okay. And then in February, we received a call that he had tried to commit suicide. So as a mother, all I could do was break down at that point. But I went ahead and sought out the resources, sought out therapy, so I could be able to help him when he did return home. So that's why I'm passionate about mental health.
Main reason I'm interested in this is because we've been ignoring the stigma surrounding mental health, especially in the Black community, in other communities, in the African community. And this stops many men, especially, from seeking help when they need it most. And it's literally killing them.
I have a question for the panelists. And the first question is, what is a stigma, and what does it look like or feel like?
If I could jump in, I think it's a mark of disgrace simply because, particularly as men, we are not bred to talk about these very sensitive topics. We are not taught to express ourselves, right? A lot of our fathers didn't have the tools. Many of our grandfathers didn't have the tools to express themselves. So generationally, it's become one of these things that, hey, if you want to talk about your feelings, what is that? Talking about feelings as a man, that's not a cool thing, or it's not welcome in certain communities, because in certain communities that we grew up in, we are taught to be sort of a manly man, to be tough and to process life without sharing how we truly feel. So I think it is a mark of disgrace. And depending on the particular family that an individual was raised in and a community that was raised in, it's a terrible thing for men to talk about expressing feelings, and it's actually frowned upon.
I would echo what Brother Rashad just communicated. It's something that hasn't been normalized in the life of the majority of men. Not all men. I don't want to use a broad brush in a universal sense, but for many men, speaking of myself in particular, I was raised by a U.S. Marine. So from the time I was ankle high, I was taught to be tough. You know, you fall off that bike, scrape off that thing, and keep moving. Don't talk about it. Don't even cry. And so when we have other issues and circumstances and situations that we're dealing with as men, we're kind of raised to deal with it on our own. When it's all said and done, how many other men do I personally know that are dealing with a mental health issue? If, in fact, they're not telling me, we're not having a conversation. So I don't know that my brother even needs the help. So that's part of it as well. So congratulations on Men Impact Change having this type of a scenario and this type of panel discussion to help the men in our communities, not just locally and regionally, but nationally and internationally, to feel more comfortable and having the conversation and keeping the information in confidence, not going out and telling others what we talked about, but we keep it in confidence. And that will also be very helpful as well.
So even for men, even depression, looking at depression, they still think it's a weakness. To say I'm depressed, we view it as a weakness in the first place. So I would say it's about this toxic masculinity. Even being a male is toxic in itself, because what society expects of you, what your family expects of you, it's something you're brought up. And so you have all this pressure on you. Am I living at my expected performance by my family, expected performance by my relatives? Maybe am I allowed to cry? Because sometimes you feel like crying, but you're told, you're a macho man, you're masculine, you can't express, you can't show your emotions. So when you bundle all those together, they have a way of coming out, but because you've been told men don't cry, that's where the stigma comes in.
How can we encourage a community, especially the young men, to talk about it?
I think we have to create healthy and safe spaces for these conversations to take place. So if I am one that I have never been taught to talk about mental health, to talk about feelings, anything along those lines, I'm going to be less resistant to even begin to go down that path if I don't feel like that environment is safe. So that environment has to be safe. And I think Brother Kevin had mentioned a little bit earlier, talking about creating safe spaces like this, right? This is like an awesome forum for some young man that's potentially watching and says, hey, I see people, particularly men of color, talking about it. So that makes it okay to talk about it. So one of the things that I do as a therapist, and I'm not just talking about in session, in wherever I'm at, I'm talking about mental health, because to me, somebody else might be watching and that gives them sort of this internal power. Yeah, well, he's talking about mental health. Maybe I can talk to him about mental health. And then imagine if those little pockets grew and grew, now we have more and more environments where it's okay to talk about mental health. And I think just talking about mental health in a general sense, right? So, and when I mean a general sense, what would that look like if you get in your car in the morning with your kids and on the way to taking them to school, you know, or picking them up from school, how was your day today? And not just how was your day, what emotions did you experience? That's one of the things that I started to do with my twin girls. But what if we do that? Now we're creating these regular spaces. So it's not, if we talk about mental health, it's like, oh, mental health, wow. No, we're making it pretty regular. Yeah, it's a regular thing. And we're creating this space that it's a regular thing. So in my household, for an example, we talk about mental health. How are you feeling today? Did anybody bully you? What emotions did you experience? And it's become so commonplace that my kids are responding to it. My kids are telling me about some of their friends. Well, you know, my friend has anxiety. And I'm like, oh, okay. What is anxiety? My kids know I'm a therapist, but what is anxiety? So my kids are now telling me about anxiety and what they think of depression. And we're having these dialogue, this sort of back and forth dialogue. So I think it's just creating these spaces where, and Brother Kevin used his word again, where we normalize it. This shouldn't be abstract. This should be very, very normal in our households and our communities.
How would we, in communities, and especially African communities where they don't really talk about emotions, how would you suggest that we begin having those conversations?
One way to answer that question, Sunny, is access to information. And a byproduct of access to information is now getting more venues on board. So I know we're going to share resource information as a part of this panel discussion, but there are a lot more resources out here available for us to learn more about what causes it, what to do about it, how to pick up signs that someone is dealing with it. These resources can now be taken into our social and civic organizations, into our church, into our workplace, our neighborhood association. When you think about all of the different connections that we have, that we're currently not comfortable in talking about the issue, the more access to information we have and the more venues that are generating the opportunity to have a conversation, now we're starting to open up the aperture. And that's a good way to eradicate or at least reduce the current stigma that's out there. And I know we're talking about men, but this is for all of our beautiful women as well that are internalizing this issue. And so I'm a firm believer in access to information. Now, one of the things that I'm doing to participate in the conversation is in my role as the Faith Community Commissioner for our governor here in Maryland for suicide prevention, because the two kind of cross-sect. People start to think that I'm not good enough to be here, and so I'll just take my life. But no, let's open up the conversation about why you feel that way. And it always goes to what's happening here. What's happening here. So helping people to know who they are, to understand, and this is where the churches can come in, helping people to understand God's purpose for their lives. And then brothers like Rashad, who actually specialize in this area in terms of therapy, where to refer them to, the different counselors that are there in the community, and not to mention the parental role.
1 in 5 people will have a mental illness in their lifetime. How can we talk about this with our friends and family? And I know you've already shared that, but knowing that right now we have several attendees here, and the research says 1 in 5 will have the mental illness in their lifetime. How can we prepare for that? Or what are some of the things that we can do in order to really have an environment that is going to be more supportive when we face that particular challenge in the future?
People are less likely to talk about something if they don't know what the reception is going to be like once they talk about it. So if I'm in the household and I'm a young man and I'm having some, suicidal thoughts, I don't know that I would talk about that in a house where that's never been talked about before, or I've never seen, any resources around me, whether it's in a school environment or a church environment, any other environment I'm in. If I've never seen any resources, or I've never seen that situation being talked about, then I'm less likely to talk about it. So to me, it's just creating an environment, having the conversations in a proactive manner as opposed to a reactive manner. Again, if I'm talking about mental illness, what that looks like, and just having these basic questions, right? Then that sets itself up that if I am going through something, then I may want to talk about it, because we've talked about that before. But if we never talked about it before, if we never just talked about it from a general sense, then I'm not going to talk about it. And then, we have this 1 in 5, and the 1 in 5, that number is going to be there regardless. 1 in 5 people are going to go through mental illness. But I think it's how well we are prepared to assist them once they go through. And that becomes a result of, hey, we got to talk about it in advance. And again, by talking about it, people are going to say, hey, if I talk about it, I think the people around me, they're going to be there to support me, right? And the that you had mentioned something before, dealing with your own son, right? And I think that when situations come out like that, it's like you had to learn the resources, how to support your son, right? As these things kind of pop up. But what if we become even more proactive, right? We become more proactive. We have the opportunity to look at signs and pay attention to things in advance. And so I know I said a lot, but the main takeaway is really talking about it, and it's like it's almost like setting the stages in our environments to kind of talk about mental health. We really, really have to do that. And I can't stress that fact enough. I see so many clients on a daily basis. They are coming to me, and these people are, gone 30, 20, 30, some 40 years, and they've never talked about these things that they are bringing to me because that environment wasn't there.
So from the time I was ankle high, I was taught to be tough. You fall off that bike, scrape off that thing, and keep moving. Don't talk about it. Don't even cry. And so when we have other issues and circumstances and situations that we're dealing with as men, we're kind of raised to deal with it on our own. And the other issue, I think, that brings that word stigma into it, when it's all said and done, how many other men do I personally know that are dealing with a mental health issue? If, in fact, they're not telling me, we're not having a conversation. So I don't know that my brother even needs the help. So that's part of it as well. So congratulations on Men Impact Change having this type of a scenario and this type of panel discussion to help the men in our communities, not just locally and regionally, but nationally and internationally, to feel more comfortable and having the conversation.
Macho thing, if you ever watch the John Wayne movies, that's how we were brought up. Be strong, be quiet. So even for men, even depression, looking at depression, they still think it's a weakness. To say I'm depressed, we view it as a weakness in the first place. So I would say it's about this toxic masculinity. Even being a male is toxic in itself, because what society expects of you, what your family expects of you, it's something you're brought up. And so you have all this pressure on you. Am I living at my expected performance by my family, expected performance by my relatives? Maybe am I allowed to cry? Because sometimes you feel like crying, but you're told, you're a macho man, you're masculine, you can't express, you can't show your emotions. So when you bundle all those together, they have a way of coming out. But because you've been told men don't cry, that's where the stigma comes in. Like, no, I can't show my.
So I'm going to ask the next question, which is where and how do you draw strength while as men you wrestle with thoughts of depression or suicidal thoughts?
At that point, if an individual is, has suicidal thoughts, one of the initial things that I would do would be, as a therapist, right? Number one, I'm going to assure the person's safety. And one of the initial questions that I do, we'll do a safety plan. But one of the initial things that I would do so they can draw strength from is help them find hope, help them find reasons to live, right? Because at that point, if you are experiencing suicidal ideations, you are at obviously a really challenging place, and hope is not something that you really have at that point. And so it's like finding hope. And I think when we talk about finding hope, I've heard many people that have experienced suicidal thoughts say, Rashad, I don't have any hope. And I think sometimes going back down to a basic level for some people really helps them. When I'm saying like take it to a basic level, some people need to hear that, that they have family, whether they feel like they're supported by those family or not, right? Some people need to hear that they have things like that they have a residence, that they have a job. I mean, these are basic things that you can start to build upon, because if somebody, again, has experienced suicidal thoughts, then a lot of the things that you and I may see as things to build upon, that person is no longer looking in that same direction, right? They're looking in a very myopic lens, only what's in front of them in terms of what they're going through. And then I think another thing to draw strength from is understand that a lot of times when we get to the place of suicidal thoughts, is that it's very momentary. We can't see beyond whatever this barrier is that's in front of our face. So you start to ask the questions, What if this situation passes? What does your life look like after that? Because a lot of people are just looking at it from a very short-sighted lens. So those are the kind of things that people can draw strength from, trying to help them find hope. And then I think in some of those instances, even if somebody says, hey, I'm thinking about harming myself, right? What if this situation resolved? What does your life look like? Or what if this situation changes just a little bit? What does your life begin to look like after that? And then a lot of people, that often helps people, because maybe I'm just looking at it because this is all I see. What if I can give you some resources? What if I can provide you with some help? And it sort of, it helps people, because again, people just see, when you're at that point, you don't see anything but what's in front of you. And a lot of those things that we see are in front of us are really not as detrimental as we may think, right? A lot of our cognitions at that point are really unhealthy and really irrational. And if we can help somebody sort of change the lens that they're looking at it from, it kind of helps them.
And without simplifying it too much, because of the human element, everybody needs affirmation. Everybody needs to know that they're appreciated. So what a great time to affirm someone and just remind them of how special they are, whether they feel like it or not, whether they agree with it or not. Just remind them just how special they are and how precious they are.